Our theme this month is How Spirit Shines Through. And today's topic is the prayer of faith. We began this series last Sunday after spending several Sundays in June talking about the elements of the sacred continuum. That process, guided by the use of spiritual mind treatment as the most powerful form of affirmative prayer. I was very moved by how receptive some of you were about that series last month, and by the movement in your own spiritual practices as a result of that. In the wake of that, I found myself even more eager to follow that up with this series. And because the very basis of the science of mind is the use of that kind of spiritual practice in support of healing, we're now exploring ways that in which we use spiritual mind treatment as a practical application of our spiritual practices. Because the very heart of our spiritual life is that it work in day-to-day living and in the experiences of our lives. Last week I talked about maintaining a healthy mind, body, and spirit, as well as my total selfness. And that was to remind us all, myself included, that that is the wonder and the marvel of universal intelligence. It's a living presence, and it has a constant read on every one of us. And I always love repeating one of my favorite quotes from Ernest Holmes, who said, "Since some people have been healed, while others have not, the answer is not that God has responded to some and not to others. The answer is that some have responded to God more than others." So today I've chosen to speak about the prayer of faith. It's not an original title by me or even by Ernest Holmes. It's actually from the New Testament of the Bible. However, it's applicable in whatever type of prayer work one might choose to utilize. Because the operative word here is faith. A prayer of faith is an unconditional belief in both the ability and desire of spirit to hear and to answer. The healing power of that comes from the mental images held in our subjective mind, which as a result appear in our body or the body of our affairs. Let me stop and clarify what I mean by subjective mind in that statement. Each of us is the creation of a universal mind, called by many names in both religious and the scientific worlds here on planet Earth. As such, we are in that universal mind as well as of that universal mind. We are never separated from it. So there is not God's mind and my mind. There is only one mind. And we are it to the extent that we grasp it. Excuse me. And not everybody grasps that. There are not two minds, but rather two names employed in describing state of consciousness: objective and subjective. Our objective mind is what acts upon our thoughts. So when we think of God as spirit or energy, creative energy, or whatever you call the unifying power of the universe, when we think of that as all-encompassing, then our own subjective mind is expressing that at the level of our understanding. As Fonzie on the old Happy Days TV show used to say, whoa. Because this is really a biggie, folks. My subjective or unconscious mind is a composite of my previous thoughts and experiences right up until this moment. And until I realized this, it's a composite of all the thoughts, all the actions, all the expressions of the world around me. Once I realized that, I begin to choose what goes into my subjective mind, don't I? My subconscious mind. I begin to choose. What we talked about earlier in Standing in the Light was about who's in charge of me. If I try to impose my will on someone else, I open the door to them to impose their will upon me. Who's in charge of me? So it's really important for me to understand what goes into my subjective or subconscious mind. Do you remember when computer lingo began to become a part of our language? Probably most of you can. Some of you may have been too young to be aware of that. You just always knew it because it already existed when you came into this plane of existence. But I remember when the acronym GIGO, remember GIGO, G-I-G-O, came into being? Do you remember what that stood for? Garbage in, garbage out. And it's not only true where computer programs or documents are concerned. It's also true where our magnificent, powerful, limitless minds are concerned. What you put in is what you get out. Whether it's from reading, watching, doing with your hands, listening, or praying. Many of us spiritual beings having this human experience we call life have chosen to eat very selectively, for example. We view our bodies as deserving of what we choose to believe is the healthiest food available. Some of us are very selective about the use of artificially made medications for the same reason. Countless numbers of us exercise in almost limitless numbers of ways to keep our bodies strong, mobile, and looking good. And through all that, how are we nourishing the most precious resource, our mind? Because just like our bodies, and oh, by the way, we put into our minds shaping and directing our thinking. And what we put into our minds is what shapes and directs our bodies as well. Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Because our bodies are the effect in cause and effect. The mind is the cause and the body is the result. From within, as opposed to from without. The mind is always cause, and the results of thinking are always effect. Even when it comes to the physical expression of our essence in this thing called life. So, how I think, what I think, and that I think are where I must be the most vigilant. Now, let's go back to what I said earlier in the talk. A prayer of faith is an unconditional belief in both the ability and the desire of spirit to hear and to answer. The healing power of that comes from the mental images held in our subjective mind, which as a result appear in our body or in the body of our affairs. And for the vast majority of us, coming to that realization is doing some work to clear the GIGO out of our thinking. You see, faith is not blind submission or anything even close to that. Faith is exercising the muscles of the mind with strong, healthy, life-affirming ideas such that we develop in our subjective mind an unconditional belief in both the ability and desire of spirit to hear and to answer. So it's all about alignment with the universe, limitless creative energy in positive, nurturing, healthy, comfortable, peaceful, and joyful ways. As many of you know, Eric Butterworth is one of my favorite spiritual coaches. This particular book is titled The Universe is Calling. He has many other titles, just as challenging as this one. His ideas are clearly stated in his books. His words are easy to assimilate, and his message is always powerfully driven home, surrounded by his faith. In this book, The Universe is Calling, there's a chapter on affirmation and treatment. In it, he directs us that there is a science of prayer, that which enables us to get a larger idea or thought of God, a new insight, if you will, into ourselves, and a more expressive awareness of the universe, our home. He's very outspoken in saying that if one has been strongly conditioned by a traditional religious perspective, the concept that we're presenting here in Science of Mind and in metaphysics can be shocking, or at least disturbing. And if this is the case, he says, good. Because that's the shock that calls for one to unlearn the old, leading to an enthusiastic aha, going into the new. And in fact, Ralph Waldo Emerson suggests that when we break with the God of tradition and destroy the God of the intellect, then we become fired with God's presence in, around, and through us, God by means of us. Butterworth continues by seriously suggesting that you take the God out of the skies and begin to relate to its true omnipresence and omnipotence. It's an important, necessary breakthrough in consciousness, wherein you let go of the God out there and instead let God be God in you. He goes on to say that in the development of our spiritual practice, we learn to progress from speaking in our human consciousness, and we develop the art of speaking in the I am consciousness. That is also referred to as the Christ consciousness. And those of you who just finished the class that I taught up in Waimea, we studied that Christ consciousness chapter in the Science of Mind text that explains that every one of us has the Christ consciousness within us. It's how much we choose to allow that to express and to expand. But it is not limited, because nothing God does is limited to any single individual, any single religion, any single philosophy. It's universal. Butterworth is a powerful analyst of how conventional religion has allowed, even encouraged, that concept to become obscure, sometimes even lost. Part of that, he suggests, is the result of faulty translations, which led to the use of the pronoun he in place of, or as an attempt to understand what they did not comprehend. It's like taking God and promoting it to a superhuman, which it is not. It is not human. It is that and everything else. It is all of the masculine and all of the feminine. It is all of the attributes that we talk about as important to our lives. It is all of those things. It is not a person with a personality. If it were, whose personality would that be? And each of us say, well, mine, of course. But it is all that and more. Butterworth goes on to encourage us in using the prayer technique we call spiritual mind treatment to frame our development of the understanding and perception of the real spiritual practice process. And he says, remember, you pray from your consciousness, not as an escape from it. That is such a powerful statement. We learn to pray from our consciousness, not as an escape from it. We would do well, he encourages us, to do some preparation before beginning spiritual mind treatment, to have words of truth ready, and to follow up your treatment with affirmations during the day that support that treatment. Whatever your challenge is leading up to the treatment, it's within you. But then, so is the answer. So let your words flow, remembering that your source, where the solution lies, resides within as well. So what he is suggesting here is that we build our spiritual muscle. We develop our faith in discerning the truth through this alignment with divine spirit as it resides within our very being, just waiting to be called forth. And so when he talks about doing some preparation for your spiritual mind treatment, that's what we call spiritual practice. It's setting the tone, setting the table, if you will. Giving yourself the tools, the words, the faith, the understanding, and the communion with the source of your being as a partner, not some far-off wisp of an idea that may or may not be in a good enough mood on any given day to meet you. Well, all that being said, when I sat down to write today's talk, I envisioned going in a very different direction than what has appeared on these pages and been shared with you. It just flowed. And when I went back and reread it, I had to echo Fonzie's, whoa! Because this said what you came to hear. So next week's topic is elegant choices. And needless to say, it's continuation of how we learn faith, harness faith, and utilize faith in our own behalf, physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And so it is.